The Dead Space series might just be my favorite video game franchise ever. I love these games. Mostly the second one, but the first one is also a certified classic. The third one is also there, so, you know, good for it. Anyway, I love Dead Space is my point. So naturally, when the Callisto Protocol was first announced, I got really excited. There hadn't been a new Dead Space game since 2013, and along comes this spiritual successor that was being directed by one of the original co-creators of Dead Space. At the time, this seemed like the closest thing to a new Dead Space game we were ever gonna get. Obviously since then, a full from the ground up remake of Dead Space was announced and will release next month. And as cool as that is, there is still a lot of hype for the Callisto Protocol. I was definitely excited about this game, especially after we finally saw some gameplay. The first gameplay trailer gave off strong Dead Space vibes for obvious reasons, and it looked fantastic. Well, now the game is here, and I can definitively say I'm a little bit let down. When I got to the credits of Callisto, I had a lot of mixed feelings. I legitimately had to sit for a moment and figure out what my feelings towards the game actually were. I wasn't sure if I liked it, for various reasons I'll get into in a sec, and it's been a while since I was this conflicted about a game. I stared at my own reflection and contemplated my entire life up to this point. It took me a long time, potentially years, but I did it. I figured out exactly how I feel about this game, the Callisto Protocol. Overall, I liked it and had more fun with it than not, but it is still far from perfect. While I enjoyed the game quite a bit, I feel like it didn't quite live up to its full potential. And I'm not the only one that feels this way. The game has had a very mixed reception since launch. Welcome to this video, I'm Tin from Maxx, and today we're talking about the Callisto Protocol and my thoughts on the game now that it's here. I summed it up just now, but let's dig a little deeper into why exactly that is. Let's start on a positive note. Despite my disappointment with the game, there's still a ton of stuff to like. In fact, there's enough good that I still really like the game even with its flaws. I know I keep saying that, but I really want to make it clear that I did like the game. You can like something and still acknowledge everything wrong with it. Crazy concept, I know, but it's true. I am going to try to avoid comparing it to Dead Space too much since it is its own game and should be treated as such. However, at the same time, it is very clearly inspired by Dead Space. The look, feel, and gameplay is all very Dead Space, and it was literally directed by one of the original creators of Dead Space, Glenn Schofield. Plus, he's not the only Dead Space OG who worked on the game. Steve Papaitis, sorry I probably butchered your name, who led the series after Glenn left Visual Games, Scott Whitney, designer for Dead Space, and Christopher Stone, the animation director for Dead Space, are all also on board for this game. So while I'll try to avoid direct comparisons as much as I can, they are also completely valid. There is a ton of Dead Space's DNA present in this game. Anyway, let's just get on with it. One of the biggest high points from this game for me is how amazing it looks and feels. And I don't just mean graphically, although it does look stunning visually. The whole vibe for the game is absolutely perfect. Everything from the set pieces to the atmosphere of the environments all exists to boost the horror ambiance, and it does so fabulously. I wouldn't totally describe the game as terrifying or anything like that, but it's definitely creepy and intense. Walking through the hallways of Black Iron Prison or the underground caverns of Callisto never really got old for me. The game does a great job of keeping the environments fresh and exciting as you play through the game. At least for the most part. The lighting alone is immaculate and some of the best I've seen in a horror game. It helps that one of Schofield's goals with the game was to make the scariest game on next-gen platforms. I don't think the horror hits as well as it did with OG Dead Space, and it uses a lot of the same tricks and scare tactics as that did back in the day, but they aren't done poorly here. I've just seen them a lot. If you're new to horror games, then I think this game could really get you. One thing Dead Space was really good about in its first game was the world building. The Ishimura was so carefully crafted and built to feel and function like it could actually exist. Like it was a real place. The whole universe around the Dead Space games did this too. That's present here too. It's a lot less thorough than Dead Space, but I think Callisto does a pretty great job of dumping you into what feels like a pre-existing world. I think a lot of love and attention went into building Callisto and Black Iron Prison, and it shows in the final product. I would definitely love to see more from this world and explore more corners of the universe we get in this game. Plus, did I mention that it looks insanely good? Something I don't really bring up often in these videos but deserves a ton of credit is the animation, and I really want to bring that up here because I think the animations in this game are really good. Not just the brutal death animations either, although there are a ton of those. The way the creatures move is eerie as hell and really well done too. I appreciate the small details like the way the main character will occasionally check his surrounding environment. Barely noticeable, but adds a ton to make the game feel more grounded. Speaking of the main character, let's talk about the story and characters. The story didn't blow me away at all, but I still found it to be mostly satisfying. There weren't any surprises or big memorable moments, but that didn't really stop me from enjoying the ride. I did end up liking the main character quite a bit, though that might be more because he's played by that one soldier guy from the first Transformers movie, and I liked that movie a lot as a kid. He's pretty great. He has that everyman angle that works really well for a horror game protagonist. He's just a regular guy trying to get out of this terrible situation. The characters do suffer a bit from being a bit two-dimensional, which I feel is often the case with horror game characters. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing or a big problem or anything like that. Would it be nice if they had more depth to them? Yes. Do I care that they don't? Not really. I'm just here to shoot monsters and not die a horrible death. Not that I was all that good at that, but still. The story is serviceable at worst and leaves the door open for more interesting stories and adventures in the future. I would genuinely love to see more from this universe and see what lies in store for the grander story taking place. We should at least get some of that with the story DLC releasing as part of the season pass, so I'm looking forward to seeing what that is. You know what, let's talk about the season pass real quick. I'm a little peeved with it, to be honest. The season pass features some modes and content that I personally feel like should just be in the game already. In its current state, you can only play through the story and basically nothing else. That's fine, I guess, but it would be nice if there was any kind of replayability, especially with this being a $70 game. The season pass does offer this, but with a $30 price tag, meaning you need to spend a total of $100 on this game to get what I feel like is a complete game. The season pass offers a permadeath mode, something that the base game for Dead Space already had, and what seems to be some kind of horde mode. Just, put those in the normal game. That would give it some kind of replayability at least. And to be completely fair, they are adding a hardcore difficulty and a new game plus to the game for free, but not until February, which is also when you start getting the season pass content. I'd be fine with it if the season pass was just for the story DLC. I don't have a problem with that at all. It just feels like they put stuff that should have been in the base game behind a paywall just to make a few extra bucks. There are even some death animations exclusive to the season pass, which is just really lame. It just kind of sucks is all. Well, now that I'm done whining about that, let's finally get into the gameplay aspects of Callisto. It plays a lot like Dead Space, which I'm completely fine with, and it does add some new elements to the formula as well. There is a stealth mechanic to this game which reminded me a lot of The Last of Us. It's not as well implemented in this game as it is there, but it is a nice bit of change up. Using stealth properly can get you through certain combat encounters without ever having to fire a shot. Another big addition is a much more robust melee system. Dead Space had melee, but it was mostly used to get enemies off you and give you some breathing room. Here in Callisto, it plays a much bigger and fundamental role. Being good at the melee is somewhat essential to get through this game successfully, especially earlier on in the game when you have less upgrades in health and whatnot. Real quick sidebar, this game is brutal. Like with most games I played this game on normal difficulty and it was high-key hard. I died a lot. I say this in almost every video, but I'm not that great at games, just in general. But even still, this game was really tough at times. The enemies are no joke and will take you out very quickly if you're not careful. It's also very easy to get overwhelmed. Honestly, if you're looking for a more balanced playthrough, then you might want to start with easy mode and see how you do with that. It's probably closer to a normal difficulty than the actual normal difficulty. Back to the melee. I really like this as a concept, especially as something that helps keep the gameplay fresh and intense in each encounter. The problem comes with the game's over-reliance on melee combat. Despite how much the game wants you to use the melee, it's not super fleshed out. Each melee encounter basically comes down to dodging a few enemy attacks and responding with your own, which in itself is fine, but it does get pretty repetitive fast, because they don't really change it up at all throughout the game. There are some upgrades for it, but they don't shake up the melee enough to keep it interesting. Another big problem with this is the lack of variety in the enemies you face off with. With a few slight exceptions, basically all the enemies act the same way, which means you deal with all the enemies in the same way. Compared to the necromorphs of Dead Space, this is a pretty massive step backwards. The necromorphs all come in different shapes and sizes, and different tactics and strategies work better against some than others. Most of the enemies in Callisto come down to basic human-shaped zombies that don't really behave differently from the others. They remind me of the clickers from the Last of Us games, and that's something I didn't love with those games either. Combine the lackluster enemies with a basic melee, and they create a very repetitive gameplay loop. All that being said, there are stuff you can do to keep things interesting, like the Kinesis feature that isn't called Kinesis, but functions almost exactly the same as Kinesis, so I'm just going to call it Kinesis. Using this, you can launch enemies into conveniently placed wall spikes, which are really helpful for clearing out large groups when you are outnumbered. You can also use it to launch explosive barrels or items at enemies. There are also the guns, which, and I know I said I wouldn't do this too much, but oh well, too late now, aren't as varied as the ones in Dead Space. They help make combat encounters more varied, but not by much. They all kind of play the same. All this combined with the melee does help make each fight fresh. For a while. I think some people will find it more repetitive than others, and I totally understand why, but it didn't totally feel that way to me. At least not until late in the game. By the end of the game, I was pretty sick of the melee combat, especially thanks to the dodge mechanic. The dodging almost completely ruined the melee combat for me personally. I just feel like it didn't really work all that well. It felt very inconsistent. At first I thought it was just me still learning and getting used to it as a gameplay mechanic, but the more the game went on, the more it began to frustrate me. I do want to preface this by saying maybe it is just me. Maybe it just never fully clicked for me, which if true is fine. For the most part, it being inconsistent wasn't a problem. It was just annoying at most. It crossed the line to obnoxious when it was the linchpin to beating certain bosses. This one big boy enemy made me almost quit the game entirely. Every single one of its attacks was an insta-kill, so when the dodge didn't work, it meant I had to do the whole fight over again. It was just really frustrating. Jacob isn't fast enough to put distance between himself and the enemies, which means you need to rely on the dodge a lot. It just felt unfair when I would do the dodge input and get instantly killed immediately anyway. It was annoying. And these stupid things popped up several more times during the endgame. They wouldn't have been so bad if A, every single one of their attacks wasn't an insta-kill, and B, I could count on the dodge to actually dodge. It made the game more frustrating than fun. Apparently they might patch the game so this isn't a thing, which will be nice if true, but I'll believe it when I see it. Another mechanic that I felt wasn't fully thought out was the healing mechanic. In Callisto you can hold a button and heal Jacob using health injectors. The process is intentionally slow so you're forced to use it strategically. I understand this choice and I think it's a great idea as a concept. The issue is that it's so slow that it's basically useless during actual combat. Enemies are too fast and persistent to ever give you a chance to heal, bosses especially. I think this would be easily fixed with some kind of stun feature, like a flashbang or something similar that temporarily stuns the enemy so you can actually heal. It works with the resource management side of things and actually adds to the strategic aspect too. Right now the healing mechanic just adds to what I already find to be a very frustrating combat loop. I feel like that kind of sums up my issues with the game in general. The ideas are great, but the actual execution leaves a lot to be desired. Take the exploration as an example. I loved exploring as much of Black Iron as I could, and I think the level design was really well done. The environments you explore were designed so you could explore different areas and pathways without ever really having to back travel. This is something I really appreciated. I just wish they had some kind of map to tell you where you're going and where you can explore. I don't need the location thing from Dead Space that literally shows you exactly where to go, but I would love a map to show me where I've been and where I need to go. It's a small improvement, sure, but one I think would improve the exploration and the navigating by a lot. I admit this is more of a personal preference thing, but still. There is a ton about this game that I really like. The graphics and the atmosphere are astounding, and while the gameplay is definitely repetitive, I still had fun with it for most of my playthrough. It just gets really frustrating by the end, and the story isn't strong enough for me to look past that. This is why I think I ended up feeling disappointed by the time we reached the credits. The final boss was frustrating for the same reason as those big boy boss fights, and while that didn't totally ruin the game for me, it did sour my playthrough quite a bit. Plus, despite the fact that it ran great on the PS5, with maybe a bit of frame droppage at points, it apparently was kind of a show on PC at launch, so that's a whole nother layer to this. I can't really speak to that too much since I didn't experience that myself, but it sounds pretty bad. There was a lot of hype for this game, and while I don't think the final product is terrible at all, it just didn't live up to the hype for a lot of people, myself included. If Striking Distance Studio pays attention to what people are saying about this and takes into consideration with whatever they do next, it could be really good. This studio has a ton of potential just from the people involved alone. There is so much to this game, and it's clear to me that they were really trying to make something special. I definitely want to see more from the studio, and I would love a sequel to Callisto that addresses and fixes the issues people have. Maybe they'll even fix a lot of it with whatever DLC or patches they release in the future. Alright, I think this video might be a bit more disjointed than usual, and that's just because I had a hard time sorting through my thoughts and feelings with this game. In total, I have a lot more positive feelings towards the game and probably will play it again in the future. I also recommend checking it out for yourself, preferably on sale because games are unnecessarily expensive these days. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments down below if you've played it. From what I've seen, reception has been a bit all over the place with this game, so I'd love to see some different opinions. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video, and check out some of the other content we got going on here. Thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in whatever I do next.